Welcome to the Decentralized Mind podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuela, and today I have with me Frank Clegg, former president of Microsoft Canada. So glad to have you on here.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
So maybe we can start off. Can you tell us what got you into understanding the risks of what I call non-native EMFs?
Yes, it happened over a decade ago. I was approached by several neighbors that had cell towers going up. One was near a kid's playground. One was actually 20 meters away from their son's bedrooms. And I had the opportunity, because I was retired, to go out and meet with experts from organizations such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, University of Toronto, McGill. And one expert was a member of Al Gore's team who won the Nobel Prize, and another was a advisor to the World Health Organization and actually had received the Order of Canada Award for the work he'd been doing. So that's the quality of the people that I was able to meet with, Emmanuela. And I came to the conclusion that our implementation of wireless technology was not safe, and I was especially concerned about its impact on children. So I started Canadians for Safe Technology back then. It was about 2012. And our goal with C4ST is really to raise awareness about the harmful effects of wireless radiation, particularly on humans, although we're starting to see more evidence about the effect on animals and plants. And also to really work and lobby government to try to get them to improve the standards, because their standards are woefully inadequate and among the worst in the world. So that's kind of a truncated version of the last decade and a bit of what we've been focused on.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit from your side of the science around the issue with non-native EMFs, and I might, throw in here and there the biological side.
Yes. The experts that I talked to, and there are a couple of appeals. I'll just give you an idea of the volume of science that's out there. There are hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed, published studies in high-quality journals that show harm. Period. Full stop. And so the top couple are certainly increased risk in cancer for sure. There's dozens and dozens of studies that show that. There's the damage to DNA or damage to DNA. We had one professor from Columbia University who had spent 4 decades on DNA research and presented to bodies in Ottawa, one of them being the Parliamentary Health Committee, talking about damage at the DNA level. His name was Dr. Martin Blank. There's sperm damage and reproductive harms. There's impacts, learning and memory deficits. We had a professor from the University of Yale, who's a dean at Yale, who published a study. He had studied mice in embryo, and the baby mice were born. He said if they were children, they would be diagnosed with ADHD. So again, impacts and again peer-reviewed published study. There's certainly damage at the oxidative stress and at the cellular level. So again, and these are all at levels below Canada's current safety standards. So it's not like you have to break the guidelines to have this harm. You can have this harm today, just the way we use cell phones and are exposed to Wi-Fi and other radiation just in our normal day-to-day lives.
And I like to point out that a lot of the studies, even today, are still using like GSM technology, which would be the equivalent of 2G, and they're using it for unrealistic periods of time, like comparing 15 minutes to 45 minutes on 2 groups of rats, which is ridiculous because we're exposed to it 24/7.
Well, the other thing is that we'll talk, if you want to get into Safety Code 6 is Health Canada's guidelines, their standard is based on a 6-minute exposure. So, you're worried about 15 to 45. Well, our government right now says, no, 6 minutes is enough to be able to determine if it's harmful or not. And of course, as you point out, depending on what it is, if it's Wi-Fi, if it's a cell tower near your home, you're exposed potentially 24 hours a day. Or if you're a kid in a school, that whole 6 to 8 hours that you're in the classroom, you're exposed. So our guidelines are way, way, way behind the science.
Yeah, and they're even like 6 minutes. I think that's in like a 6 foot, the equivalent of like a 6 foot male, right?
Oh, well, that's the other thing. The model is a 200-pound model, right? And so, children have thinner skulls. The center of their because the skulls are smaller, the Wi-Fi penetrates further, or the phone penetrates further, because they're higher degree, or they're higher water levels in the brain, the child's brain. That not only does radiation get further in, but it's actually absorbed and retained longer. So yeah, we in Canada and North America use a 200-pound mannequin as our model for our safety standards.
Yeah, and there's also myelin. Like in my business, I've seen that people who are lifelong vegetarians or vegans tend to be more likely to be sensitive and suffer negative effects from EMFs because their myelin's been compromised. And a child has an unmyelinated brain, especially the frontal cortex, which is the area of decision, violence, like all of these things. And that doesn't happen until you're like 22 to 25.
Wow.
So the risk is massive.
I didn't know that. Well, there you see, I learned something every day. So thank you for that. Of course, your medical background, you would know that. But yes, well, we haven't even talked about there's a percentage of the population that are electrosensitive, and sometimes it's called microwave sickness. But this, and the most conservative estimate, it's in the 10 to 12% range of the population. And these are people who are debilitated. They cannot, a lot of times they lose their job because they can't go to work. And of course, then if you lose your income, then you may not, you lose your house. So I get, just heartbreaking stories from, a lot of times it's women. I don't know why. Maybe women are more aware of what's going on than some of us males, and they realize that it's the environment that's causing them a problem. And so I will get emails or letters, handwritten letters from people that they're living in a campground because that's the only safe place they can be. So this whole, and our government refuses to acknowledge that there is something called electrosensitivity. Oh, that's not fair. They acknowledge that there is something called electrosensitivity and a percentage of the population is sensitive, but they will not accept the direct connection that the science shows between electrosensitivity and exposure to wireless radiation.
Yeah. And even worse, I mean, with touching on what you said about it being women,
Yeah.
I get this asked, people ask me this all the time. And the thing is that as women, we're the ones who carry our mitochondrial genome to our kids. Men don't. So women are meant to be the canary in the coal mine. So we're always going to be more sensitive to EMFs, artificial light, and general environmental stressors because, well, we're the canary.
Okay, well, and it's unfortunate. It takes us forever. Like it took 60 years from the first science on tobacco smoke and the harm to humans for legislation to be in place. And unfortunately, this canary in the coal mine, we haven't learned from that. We haven't learned from asbestos, from thalidomide, from DDT. We just don't seem to be learning from any of this. So yes, this whole canary in the coal mine scenario is going to continue. And it is frustrating, to be honest with you, that we can't get government to react sooner and more efficiently.
And what do you like, what's your take on all the studies where they're trying to quote unquote debunk electrohypersensitivity and they're putting people in like rooms where they're telling them, oh, we've disabled everything,
Yeah.
but we haven't in the other room. And my husband was showing it to me and I was looking at this and I was like, well, there's so many variables here that are
Yeah.
not being addressed. Like, where's the closest tower? Where's the closest hydro corridor? None of this is being controlled for.
Well, it's also there is a whole moral dilemma. So the scientists who truly believe there is an issue will not do experiments on humans, right? Because they say ethically. Because I've talked to dozens of scientists and they say, no, Frank, I won't. I will not run a science experiment on a human. I will do it on animals. I will do it on and I will do modeling. But I won't do it on humans. The best study that we had on that environment was the National Institute of Health in the U.S. spent $20 million to set up mice and rats, and they did something like over 2,000 rodents, and they put them in Faraday cages. So they were able to absolutely 100% control this experiment. And they actually peer-reviewed the 3 times. The whole experiment was peer-reviewed 3 times. The first time, just before when they set up the experiment, they had scientists come in and analyze it. Then they set it up, the preliminary results, and then they had to peer-review the final results. And they came out and said there is definitely a connection between the exposure to radiation and the rats that were exposed. And they had shawarmas in their heart, which is a cancer, and growth. And, we still, even after that $20 million study by the National Institute of Health, National Toxicology Program, it was verified by the Ramazzini Institute in Italy. So now you've got formal study, right, thrice peer-reviewed, results verified, peer-reviewed, published, and our government still didn't do anything, still didn't act.
Is that the 2013 study with Volkov?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just, were earth-shattering, worldwide coverage, people coming out, and the industry went at it and tried to attack it, and they couldn't attack it. They just couldn't, because it was thrice peer-reviewed. $20 million is a lot of money. Several thousand rodents, to your point, not a handful in a cage or something. This was several thousand, and consistent. And the terminology they used was to say the most clear evidence of harm. Not, that was the highest category available in the National Institute of Health's terminology.
Yeah, and that's the same paper that showed that there was exposure to 3G radiation increased blood sugar independent of food.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I just like mention some of the things we have. We're now starting to see impacts on the blood-brain barrier, which you would know better than I do how severe that is. And so when you start breaking through that, if you have any other kind of a chemical inefficiency in your body, what the wireless radiation does, it only magnifies that. And it makes the harm even more impactful.
I would argue that with the advent of especially wireless headsets and AirPods, that now the majority of the population is walking around with an open blood-brain barrier, and that was back from the 60s, like Alan Frey, right?
Yes.
And I would argue that every single medication being handed out today needs to be reassessed because now it's entering into the brain and spinal cord.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things that, when we talk about our website, c4st.org, we say, what are your tips? One of the things is just keep these things as far away from your body as you can, because the exposure level goes down with the square of the distance. In other words, if I double the distance, the radiation goes down 4 times. If I triple it, goes down 9 times. So earbuds, no. So phone to your head, no. In your shirt pocket, in your bra, in your pants pocket. No. Don't sleep with it near you. I know I'm lecturing, as our daughters would say, okay, Dad, we get the point, stop lecturing. But, distance is your friend. And so, yes, and it only magnifies it around your head. Anything around your head only makes it worse.
And most people may not realize that there's no blood-brain barrier in the ear.
Yes.
It's like your nose. It's like up your nose or in your ear is like direct line to the brain.
Yeah, and people don't know that. Absolutely not.
Yeah, no, but they really should, because I think it's starting to get out of control especially with the rollout of, I know you've done videos and stuff like that. You've talked about 5G.
Yes.
I want to kind of define it a little bit, because I had, near my house, there's like these boosters that are up. I don't know exactly when they went up, but I thought they were like 5G, as in like the milliwave, like the different, what's the proper
millimeter
word?
waves is
Millimeter waves?
Yes.
Yeah. But when I had a professional come in and test my house with his special meters, he said actually they're like 5th generation LTE.
Yes. Yeah, there's 2 things that 5G did. One is a millimeter waves part of it, which is at the lower end of the spectrum, and then the 5G, which you just think of it as 4G plus. And so that's what we're used to. Now, the strength of 5G, what it does, think of the frequency as it's a pipe of information that's coming at you. What 5G does is the pipe is bigger. So in other words, more information can go. And so what the industry will say is that's good for video and all that. The trade-off with 5G is, even though the pipe is wider, it has to be narrower, right? It's just about physics, right? You can only have so much information go for a certain period of time. So hence, you will start to see these 5G antennas, and some of the modeling that we've seen says that they could be at every 100 feet in residential or in business in commercial areas, because the pipe just is so short. It has to be so short to get it. So the trade-off that we're getting is, the good news is that you can have more video. The bad news is you're going to be just more exposed to more towers, because they need more towers to be closer to you. The millimeter wave one is just a whole other different animal that we can talk about if you want. I'm not a physicist, so I can't get into it, but the concern, let me just back up with 5G, Emmanuel, a little bit. There has been no testing that we're aware of about 5G being safe. And so there's the top end, which says, bigger pipe, closer distance. We know that's not a good thing. The millimeter wave scenario, some of the applications for millimeter wave is the U.S. and Israeli military use that for crowd control. Because what it does is it actually, at a higher power than they're talking about in industry, that's fair, but it's still the same frequencies, it actually hurts your skin so much that people actually disperse. So here we are just introducing this technology to the marketplace because it happens to go between these two random areas of physics called the non-ionizing spectrum, right? We allow industry to go and ship those into the marketplace. And there's been zero testing that we're aware of. So that's the concern. And so, when you talk before, people aren't aware about the ears and people aren't aware that. I've talked to people and they say, well, it is kind of interesting. When I put my phone to my head, I do find my head gets hot. That's probably not good. And I said, you're right, it isn't good. So don't do that. Right? And so, we have to, let me digress for a second. We actually had a report presented in Parliament by the Parliamentary Health Committee, and we were able to work with our local MP here, and I live in the Oakville area, and we got Hedy Fry, who was the former Minister of Health in the Liberal Party. So you had the Conservatives, Liberals, and the NDP working together. And they issued this report, and one of the recommendations, the 12 recommendations, was that Health Canada should run an awareness campaign to Canadians to make them aware. And they absolutely would have nothing to do with that. So to your point, people aren't aware, and our government is not making them aware and refuses to let people know that, hey, this is not good. Being exposed, in your Wi-Fi in your house, put it on a timer when you go to bed if you have to have it, or run cables. I tell people, I've been in the industry over 40 plus years. We've never had Wi-Fi in any home we've ever owned. And we survived. I have two daughters that went through their teenage years in high school, and they had a cable into their PC, and they work with that, and you're smiling because you know one of them, and they're now in their 30s and they have children, and they've survived. So, but yet Health Canada won't, even just those simple safety tips to let people know that we're not saying don't use the technology. What we're saying is just be smart and safe about how you use it.
Yeah, like I use a ton of tech, but at the same time, like I'm hardwired everywhere, like not just my computer. I hardwire my phone.
Yes, good for you. See, I do that too, but there's very, very few people who do that. And, God bless you for doing that. You're smart enough to do it. So yeah, as I say, it's just frustrating that Health Canada absolutely refuses to take any responsibility to warn Canadians and just say, look, be careful, be aware.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm going to get into that, I would even argue that it's intentional, that they don't want people aware because of, like, we've just had this data for so long. I don't know if you're familiar with Delgado and the research that he did in the 60s.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, basically you can control a bull. First they tried with wires, and then they tried wirelessly, where they were able to get the bull to stop charging the matador just using wireless waves.
Interesting. Well, there's also some financials involved here too, right? We did a calculation, and Industry Canada sells the frequencies to the telecommunications companies. And of course, each auction the value is going up, increasing. So to date, this is a year ago, our government had received over $20 billion in revenue from selling those frequencies. So there is this whole economic reason for the government not to act. And plus there's an industry out there that would slow down a little bit. If people had to, wire things, and the industry would slow down. And of course, the industry will do everything to lobby against anything that slows down the advancement of technology, because that impacts the revenue stream. So yes, there is the whole control part of it, but there's also some serious money involved in this whole industry as well.
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, but they do say this too. They do admit, like, tech's holding up the economy, right? So that becomes a very sticky situation.
It can hold it up on fiber and wired connections too, though.
It can. I agree.
There's a professor out of Colorado, Dr. Tim Shockley, who wrote a paper several years ago now called Reinventing Wires, and he shows a business case where actually fiber is the long-term cheapest investment, because when you think about 2G and then 3G comes in, well, a lot of times the 3G antennas have to replace the 2G, and 4G replaces 3G, and 5G uses some of the built-in technology, but a lot of it's replaced. Whereas if you're running fiber cable, you run it once and it's done, and you're finished. And so that, your upfront cost. Now the problem is it's a significant investment up front. And of course, a lot of the industry executives are measured quarter to quarter, right, on the stock price and profit. So it's very, very hard. It would take an extremely visionary CEO to say, okay, I am going to bite the bullet. We're going to make this humongous investment up front, disproportionately more in fiber, and then run it. So yeah, you can hold the economy up, but to my mind, you can have your cake and eat it too. Yes, let's hold the economy up. Let's have the technology. Let's have all access to the internet. But let's just do it in a wired environment.
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't. Some of the speeds that people are like, oh, faster. Like you can't really even get faster.
Well, the other crazy part of that is that fiber is in most times 100 times faster than wireless. People kind of miss that point. Say yes, if you really, and good gamers are not confused about that. They don't use wireless to their network. They use a high-speed internet, right? And they wire their consoles to their device, to their PlayStation or their Xbox or whatever, because they want optimum speed. So they know that, right? And then, of course, you have all the other benefits of fiber, right? Where it's more secure, uses significant less energy, can't be hacked, right? Like it's really hard to hack a wired system. You have to physically make a connection, whereas hacking a wireless one is a lot easier. So yeah, let's prop up the economy. I'm all for it. Let's just do it smarter, cheaper, faster, better with wired. So
in your foray into this, have you also gotten into like ELF, EMFs, like electric and magnetic?
No, when we first started C4C, we the first decision we had to make was whether we were going to do, because we were in Ontario, we were very worried about cell towers. There just seemed to be a proliferation of cell towers. We started working with the people in BC and Quebec, and they were worried about smart meters, the smart gas meters, because both Hydro-Quebec and BC Hydro were on a campaign to get out smart meters in all the homes. So we made the decision to go all electromagnetic frequencies, all electromagnetic radiation. But we were a small group, we drew the line and said, no, we can't get into the ELFs. There is amazing science. There's some amazing work being done. There's some amazing Canadians that have done some groundbreaking work on that. I have been exposed to it a little bit, but we had to make the decision to say, no, it is harmful. There's a whole set of issues there, with hydro wires being near schools and all that. But no, Emmanuel, we made the decision to keep it at the wireless radiation level, and all the devices and all the infrastructure associated with that.
Yeah, yeah. And schools, like the amount of tech that's in schools right now is mind blowing. And then the amount of parents that think it's appropriate to use a digital babysitter, which,
Yeah.
in my opinion, is nothing short of child abuse unless you've got a wired connection with a red screen, because it's just the behavior in these children. It's like you can see the change in a minute to minute
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah. One thing
Put them in front of the screen
no, I
and they
agree.
become violent.
We made the decision a year ago to actually branch into not only the effects of wireless radiation on children, but also the social and development effects. And that's a whole field there. As you said, there's amazing science where, it affects the part of the brain that addiction comes in. There's this whole violent aspect to it. There's this whole social graces missing aspect of it. So yes, there is a lot of harm. And then it goes back to educating parents. I don't think parents are consciously doing this. No parent wants to hurt their child. But if they don't know about it, then they just slip into kind of, well, this is an easier way to do it, right? So yes, and there are studies that show that children who are exposed to technology at the age up to 20 years of age, later in life have a 5 times higher risk of getting cancer. So just exposing them to the radiation in the early ages increases the risk of cancer significantly.
Yeah, and the way I explain it when it comes to parenting is that we've dropped dopamine, right? Like you said, the effects on EMFs on,
Yeah.
how we think or addiction and your mood and behavior and social behaviors. When you look at it from a biology standpoint and you don't even think about the psychological aspects of it, because that's also a value, you have all these neurotransmitters that are responsible for whether or not you want to hang out with people, whether you want to be a loner, whether you are empathetic or not. There's also biological reasons for that, and they're controlled by light. They have like preferential spectrum, and EMFs is basically invisible artificial light that's affecting all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're increasing it from both the psychological aspect of being in front of a screen and lacking everything that is required for development, but then also from the biological standpoint, and then the parents, they become, what I call low dopamine, which means they no longer have the tolerance
Yeah.
to watch their kids run around and scream. Like they're just their tolerance has been physically altered by their phones, by their technology, by their environment, by other factors too. And now they're in a catch 22.
Yeah. And we're on this cycle, right, where you use it more, you get impacted more, and then you get the effects are worse, and then you end up just going around the corner, around this loop. So no, I listen. I agree with you. I retired a bunch of years ago, and I'm busier now than I was when I was working. It's fun, but there's a lot to do. There's a lot to learn. Just keeping on top of the science. Every time there's something that goes on, we know about it, or we learn something new. I'm going to introduce a topic. Now, we didn't talk about this earlier. We actually haven't planned this a lot, but as you said, it's kind of freewheeling, which is fun. One of the concerns that I have is that if you think about the pharmaceutical industry or the chemical industry or the transportation industry, they're mandated to prove their products, new products, are safe when they launch them in the marketplace and when they ship them in the market. The technology and telecommunications industries, they have this really, it's kind of a great ride, because all they have to do is show that it meets these standards. And this standard in Canada was developed first in the 1970s. It's built on technology and science that's 100 years old. In other words, you have to heat tissue to harm it. And that's been proven false. But these guidelines, as Health Canada Safety Code 6, is based on that science. So if you're bringing a new product to market, whether it's, let's say that's the latest 5G product, you just have to show it meets the standard, and you can ship it to the marketplace. And I just don't think that's right. I think if there's anything our government can do, is to say to the industry, okay, prove it's safe. Now, you can't prove a negative, but pharma's been able to figure that out. Chemical industries have been able to figure out. And automobile manufacturers have been able to figure out that, you need to prove that this is not going to harm people, as opposed to shipping it to marketplace and then finding out years and years, or now, as you're saying, we're just finding out now there's even more stuff out there that we didn't know about. So I think there's an opportunity for government to step up and own this and say, look, industry, take your billions and these market caps are now in the $1 trillion range of what the value of the companies are. So go spend a few $100 million on proving that this stuff isn't going to kill people or damage them.
Are you familiar with Dr. Robert Becker?
Not really, no. No, is that what he's saying?
Well, he's dead now, but he was actually one of the first people to blow the whistle on EMFs.
Yeah.
He focused a lot on ELFs because this was back in the 70s. But he was contracted by the military to do research. He was an osteopathic surgeon, sorry. And basically for the military, he conducted a high secret project on something called a sanguine antenna. Which would be like in your wheelhouse, right? EMR, EMF radiation.
Yeah.
And he basically spent the military's money proving that this wasn't safe. But then they buried the paper. And when he found out that they buried the paper and the research he did, he went on 60 Minutes and blew the whistle. And immediately after that episode was released, his entire funding was pulled. He lost his job. He lost his lab. He lost everything. He was discredited. and all of these things. And I like to point that out to people who are like, well, why are all these high class scientists saying that there's no risks?
Yeah.
Because they don't want to lose their job.
Well, I mentioned the Parliamentary Health Committee, the HESA report that came out in 2015. There was a report in 2010 that came out, and there were three scientists who were funded by university institutions that came out again and showed evidence. All three of them lost their jobs within a year and a half. The 2015 group didn't. A couple were from universities, so they weren't fired. But it is a clear strategy from the industry to take a study and just confuse the science. In other words, there are scientists that you can recognize who they are. They show up at all the industry events talking about how, there's no proof and all that. And the strategy is clearly to just, I use the term, it's not a very polite term, to just constipate the government. Because no action is actually a win. By not bringing in new standards, by not asking for a study, by not acknowledging that EHS, electrosensitivity, is caused, it just causes things to kick the can down the road for the next government. So yeah, the scientists there's a group of scientists who are hired by industry, as I say, and the first thing they will do is if there is a report that comes out that shows harm, you can see them just come out within months, just casting doubt on it. Well, what about this? What about that? So I don't think people are getting fired anymore. They're not getting. It's very hard to find new money to explore this. But I'm not aware of recently people getting fired. Although who knows what's going on? But I do know there are a group of scientists who are paid to just confuse the science, and then the government can say, well, there is not a consensus. Right? Well, if there's not a consensus, there's something called the precautionary principle, which I'm sure you've heard about, which says then you take a precautionary approach. You assume there might be harm, and then you protect people. Well, our governments don't seem to be doing that. What they're saying is, no, there's a confusing science. I'm not going to make a decision. I'm not going to do anything, and which is where we are.
Yeah, and really, when you go and read the fine print on the papers, there is no confusion. There's either, even that big study that they did in 2013 that you referenced, right, with the 3G, and they used Faraday cages.
Yeah.
I pointed this out when I ran a group with a bunch of medical professionals that, a Faraday cage is a stress in and of itself because the Earth has a magnetic field.
Yeah.
It's got a Schumann resonance. And we've done research back in the day where we put people in effective Faraday cages and they would eventually go crazy.
Oh, wow.
Because we need to sense the Earth's magnetic field.
Wow.
It's responsible for the spinning of electrons. And, you've got these mitochondria in your body. You have these ATPases and they spin, and if you can't sense the Earth's magnetic field, that screws all that up. So I would argue that the results would be even worse if they had added a Schumann generator in the Faraday cages because they're creating a secondary stress.
No, absolutely. And there are, I mentioned the EMF scientists' appeal to the UN and the member state nations of the UN asking them to step in and look at 5G. And there are 260 scientists from 45 countries around the world. So these are professionals who put their name on an appeal that's published saying, look, I am worried about 5G. I think we need to step up and do something about it to protect particularly children, are they called out. And so there is no confusion. To me, it's just, as I say, this strategy that says just confound the data, confound the government. And no government employee is going to get fired for not doing anything. They may take a risk and do. So what's the easiest solution? The easiest solution is say, oh, no, there's no consensus. I'm not going to do anything. And so that's what they do.
So what do you know about the regulations in Russia and the Russian embassy?
Well, I know that there was an event in where the Russian embassy bombarded the U.S. embassy with wireless radiation. And people got sick. And that, now it's not being presented that way. It's being presented as other things. But at the end of the day, it was super Wi-Fi radiation that was targeted and put in, and some of the employees got sick. It's interesting, there are 4 countries in the world that have guidelines up to 50% better than Canada's. China, Russia, Italy, and Switzerland. So the Russians they understand this, right? And so, my favorite example is China, which has arguably one of the worst records of humanity or human preservation or human respect have guidelines better than Health Canada's guidelines, and so or the FCC in the U.S. or most other countries in the world. So yeah, so the Russians have, they've used it, they got caught, and now they're saying, okay, let's protect our citizens a little bit. Other than that, I'm not aware much more of the embassy.
So every single, what was it? I don't know if they called him the president or no. There was a name for them who was sitting in the U.S. embassy in Russia, but basically every single one of them got a fatal form of cancer within. It was something really short, less than a year of being in the embassy in Russia, and they used they used radiation or EMFs
Yeah,
that are below the Canadian
yeah.
standards,
Yeah, no,
which is
the standard is it's 1970s and it's based on 1920 science. So, we may as well, they do something, but they're not protecting us nearly the way that we need to be protected. So the fact that the Russians used, below safety code 6, that doesn't surprise me because we know it harms. We've got studies to show it, dozens and dozens. So yeah, and yet, yeah, if you look at the media today, that part of that discussion hasn't been widely published, right?
no, no, it hasn't. Even the fact that they used aluminum foil to protect themselves
Yeah.
in there, which gets kind of like made fun of, that now they have like the to this day the windows of the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Russia, are special coated
Yeah.
to reflect EMFs. The walls are reinforced,
Mhm.
like they knew what they were doing, and this was a long time ago. So that begs the question: why the heck wasn't that transferred on to us?
Yeah, and I'll bet you every U.S. embassy in the world has got that. Well, the people that we work with who are electrosensitive, there are building biologist firms who sell that material, and it's not that expensive. Where you paint the walls a certain thing. There's sheeting, like a sheer that you can put over the windows, and clothing material. I know some people who actually there was one individual who's part of Canadian Educators for Safe Technology who spent the last 2 years in her classroom with like a beehive. She didn't put the mask, the netting over her face, but she put it on her head. And what she would do is work 2 days a week, take a day off, and then work 2 days a week with this hat on because she was extremely electrosensitive. And so, yeah, there are those materials that are out there now that you can buy that people are buying and using to protect themselves or their homes or their cars to be able to live as much as they can.
Yeah, my whole main floor is painted
Well,
with
so you've done it
the
already, so you're an expert.
black paint.
Yeah.
I have special shielding on the
Okay,
windows.
so you've done all that. So good for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this house is not in a great situation. It's too close to those, whatever they're called, I guess, LTE plus boosters
Yeah.
that went up. So, I took even more. My old house was in a very well, for some reason, isolated neighborhood. For now, until they add more, right, of
Yeah.
them, because that's the other thing actually that I wanted to talk about that maybe you can shed some light on. But I've been talking to a lot of people in the circle who are aware of EMF issues that are in other countries. And what I hear over and over and over again, that even in the US, they do not seem to be rolling out as close together towers than they do here.
I can speak to the U.S. I don't believe that's true. Certainly, what's going on right now, there's a major piece of legislation going through that what they're trying to do is to take all the power away from local states and municipalities in the U.S. and counties, and put 5G towers up without any notification or anything. So, no, they are. If it's not happening, it's only because they don't need it. But there's absolutely nothing to suggest that the U.S. Market or the FCC in the U.S. is doing anything, or that they're not proceeding at lightning speed in areas in the U.S. So,
Yeah, I'm sure they're proceeding, but I found it strange, like here in Ontario, right? You're in Ontario, I'm in Ontario. If I were to drive out even to Elora Gorge, right? You would think it's in the middle of nowhere.
yeah,
Nope, they got a giant 5G
yeah,
brand new tower
yeah.
in the conservation area.
Yeah, I can't speak to the U.S. Rules, but in Canada, they call that if there's an area that doesn't have coverage, it's called a white spot. And so when the telecommunication companies bid on that frequency, they are allowed to fill in every white spot in the country, period, full stop. And so if they determine a conservation area has a white spot and they feel that there's a revenue reason to put that tower in there, they can. I believe it's similar in the U.S. where they are just, and it just may be a matter of timing, Emmanuela, the way they haven't got there, but there's nothing that I've seen, and I'm part of the Environmental Health Trust, so I'm on the board of Environmental Health Trust, which is based in the U.S., and so, there's nothing to suggest that the industry is slowing down or doing anything at less rapid a pace than they are here in Canada. Internationally, there are some countries that are actually investigating this, like Italy comes to mind. I believe it's Switzerland and Sweden have done some work in investigating it and are putting up some roadblocks in front, but nothing that's going to stop this wholesale expansion of 5G. And now they're talking about 6G and onward. So no, I wish I could say it. I wish I could point to a country that says no. There's some that have declared that they're concerned, but there's no legislation that says no, it's stop. If any of your listeners are interested, Environmental Health Trust has a section on, what's current internationally, lawsuits that are going on. In Italy, there was actually a judgment for a plaintiff who was suing because of harm, and also any legislation that's planned or in place in countries. So that website would be a good resource for people to look at.
Yeah, for sure. And is there do they have to alert you when they're putting up those towers here?
Here in Canada, so far they do. They have to alert people in the area, but the industry is responsible to do that. They're responsible to take the feedback. And we've seen, in fact, there's one, I'm trying to remember the name of the town where they have actually proven that the industry didn't do it, and they're asking for the Industry Canada to pull the tower because they didn't follow the process. So the problem with that is that Industry Canada has made it very clear that in the local environment, if you have feedback, you cannot raise concerns about health. So let's say there's a notice that there's going to be a tower at the end of your street, right? You are not allowed, I'll say that again, to raise concerns about health. So I don't know what you raise concern about, maybe the way it looks or, but no, so then the industry takes the feedback. And then it's up to local council. So local council can non-concur, and they can say, we don't approve this tower, and force industry to work with local. And we've had, about a dozen situations in Canada where we have worked with a local community. They've got their local council on board, whether it's town, city, or municipality. Council has non-concurred on the placement of the tower and force the industry to come back and work with the local community and say, okay, we know you need to fill it in, but let's not put it right beside the schoolyard. Why don't we try this other site? And in some cases, industry has actually done that. Majority of cases, no, but I'd say about 10% of the ones we're involved in, we were able to get them to do it.
Yeah, it's such a tricky thing. I'm not really sure where we go from here in this scenario. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think the people have to really be aware of this and do something about it. I have met in the last decade now with 50 federal members of parliament, one-on-one meetings, either in Ottawa in their local office. And I will tell you, the majority of time they say, well, you make an amazingly strong case. And a member of parliament is sitting there, and when they're in their riding, people come in every half hour with an issue, right? And so the first thing they do is they make a decision, is this group credible or this person credible? And then secondly, am I going to do anything about it? Well, the first part we pass, because we have scientists and all that. The second part we don't win because they say to me, 9 times out of 10, Frank, I'm not hearing about this from my constituents. So it's therefore not an issue to them. And if it's not an issue to them, I got so many other things on my plate that are issues. I'm sorry, I'm not. I've had them say, look, I'm not going to, until I hear from my constituents, I'm not going to do anything about it. So if you are worried about it, send an email to your MP and say, I am worried. I think the guidelines are awful. That'll at least give us the opportunity. We have an appeal, a 5G appeal that we started a couple years ago. We got 20,000 signatures. Even that didn't make an impact in Ottawa. So, get educated. First of all, protect yourself and your family. Distance is your friend. Create this safe haven at home. Turn your Wi-Fi off at night. Keep your cell phones away from yourself when you're sleeping, and especially for children, right? They're exposed to the classroom environment. And you know this better than I do, Emmanuela, that kids are little healing machines if they're given that right environment. So when they go to bed at night, when they come home from school, make sure there's no exposure to Wi-Fi, make sure there's no cell phone or anything, and let their bodies heal. So do that first. Protect yourself and your family. Secondly, get engaged. Help us out. You know, go to C4ST, sign up. We send out newsletters maybe twice a year. We'll have a call to action, and get involved and get educated and help us. Raise awareness and let other people know. If there's a groundswell of information, the government will react. We've seen that with major issues, but if there's no groundswell, there's a lot on their plates right now. They just, they're going to worry about stuff that's going to get them reelected, to be blunt.
Yeah.
And right now, this is not an issue enough to cause anybody to worry about getting reelected.
And it's about connecting the dots too. Like for the people who are listening to this and they're like, well, I mean, you make a good point, but I'm more worried about, I don't know, taxes, money. And if you say that, I get it. Okay. But this is what I would have to say. Think about all of the cognitive issues that are happening today. How many times does you, as the listener, have a cognitive brain fart? Or, problems with clarity, forgetting words, dropping things. Everybody is going into this whole perimenopause thing, which I hear about all the time. I'm in perimenopause. My brain doesn't work anymore. No. Have you ever taken, I don't know if you've ever done this, take a look at all the cognitive symptoms of perimenopause and put them side by side with the symptoms of Savannah syndrome, with electrohypersensitivity. They're the same.
Yes.
So my argument is if you're suffering from cognitive issues of any kind, you are suffering from a mild form of electrohypersensitivity. Yeah. It may not be causing you to lose your job or forcing you to move to a campground, but your productivity is decreased. Yeah. Your ability to think critically has been destroyed. Your ability to actually have the attention, time, focus, energy mentally to raise awareness about an issue like this has been taken away from you. So it's time to get it back. And I'm, as a health person helping people getting healthy, I'm far more strict than you. I'm like, you want to heal, you're going to have to get rid of your Wi-Fi entirely. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many stories about arthritis that disappeared, tinnitus, ear pain, chronic infections, even, getting sick like the flu. Yeah. Did you read The Invisible Rainbow?
No, I haven't read it yet. No, it's on my list.
You gotta read it.
I will. Yeah, no, and the whole brain fog issue too. When I tell people, I say, go turn that Wi-Fi off at night, keep the cell phone out of your room, and they come back and they say, you know what, almost immediately, but certainly 2 days later, I felt better, I felt clearer. And so, so anybody who's listening to your podcast, just try it. Try that little experiment. Take your Wi-Fi and turn it off at night, right? And take any electronics and take them out of your bedroom. And in 2 days, do a check. And I bet you 9 times out of 10, you will feel better. And so, Emmanuel, you are an amazing point that we are all accepting this degradation in our quality of life as that's just getting old. And no, that's not acceptable. It's not. You shouldn't accept that. We should not accept that.
Like I can tell you crazy stories. Like, I have a client who couldn't walk up and down the steps. She's in her 60s. Okay. She had so much pain in her left leg, which is where she carries her purse, FYI. Yeah. She couldn't walk up and down the steps in her house. She had blocking of her ears, so her ears would feel like clogged or blocked. She had what she thought was arthritis, in her, pain in her joints. And she had a lot of cognitive issues, extreme fatigue, and she had what she thought were like lower stomach cramps, and later found out she had cystitis. So think like chronic UTIs, inflammation of the bladder, which women listening to this, like especially older women, is a huge issue. And guess what happened? She hardwired her entire house, and half of her symptoms went away. Wow. Unless she was in school. Yeah. Then she moved from Canada to Central America, where they don't have this yet. Not that they won't, but they're still sitting at far, far fewer towers and exposure. And within a week, everything
Wow.
disappeared.
Yeah, no, as I say, it is, it's grinding us down. And the radiation, like it's radiation, so it accumulates, right? People who work at radioactive facilities wear a little badge to make sure that the accumulation, well, we're getting accumulate. We're accumulating this every day, outside, inside. Even if you're protected in your house, you're outside. And so make that house a safe haven as much as you possibly can, and keep this stuff away from your body.
Yeah, especially for children, or even like, public schools, bringing attention to the principal, vice
Yeah.
principal of your concerns. Like, that would be a great place to start. It wasn't that long ago that schools were hardwired.
Yeah.
It really shouldn't be that hard to go back.
Well, I have a story too. I don't know if we have time, but
Yeah.
we work with a local school here and brought in a building biologist. Now the school said we are going to keep Wi-Fi because our strategy is for our students to be able to be mobile and walk around the classroom and talk in different groups and all that. We said fine. So the team went in and they only did two things. They removed several of the routers in the room because the classrooms had like 4 or 5 routers, and they got rid of them down to one. And they took the power setting on the router in the classroom and dialed it back to, like, I think less than half of what it was before. Just those two things reduced the radiation exposure to the students by 90%. And they still had 100% connectivity and response time. See, the industry, you get measured whether you have 5 bars in your phone. So they just turn everything in and they crank it up. And so there's so much we can do in the school system to reduce those levels significantly, even before you make the big step to hardware. But every new school, in my opinion, should be hardwired. Run that fiber cable to each classroom because it's so cheap when you got dry. The walls are bare. You even have to put the drywall or whatever up. And we're not doing it. We're not even doing those simple things. Anyways, yes, the school should be the first area to focus on, and it wouldn't be hard to do. And then let these kids, you still, unfortunately, people associate wireless with the internet, and they're
Yep.
two different things. There's internet connectivity. Now let's figure out the safest way to do it. Let's use wires in the classrooms.
Yeah, and people often even do not realize that when they're using their data and they have their Wi-Fi enabled, they're doubling that. Just two things that do the same thing. I always have to explain to my clients. They're like, "Well, what do I do now that I turn off the Wi-Fi?" And I'm like, "Don't you have 60 gigs of data a month?" "Oh yeah." So use it.
Exactly. Or as you say, just plug it into the Ethernet and don't even use your data plan, right?
That's like the next step
Yeah,
down.
that's
Usually I start with, like, I like to say, like, you cannot eliminate the network of towers above your head and all the people using their cell phones. And that's why zip codes, or postal codes, as you would say in Canada, dictate your health, because the number of people using the phone create a grid above
yeah,
your head. But Wi-Fi is a second grid that is under your control.
yeah,
You can just remove that grid.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
What else would you want to add to the conversation about EMFs that you think would be really critical for people to hear?
No, I think we've covered most of it. Protect yourself and your family. Get involved. If you're in the U.S., your local congressperson should be aware and do something with them. Get educated a little bit. Get engaged and help. We've talked about fiber and how that's better. We've talked a little bit about the science. I've taken a swipe at the industry to ask them to take responsibility for. I am optimistic. If you look, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about green, and now companies are stepping up and saying, "Okay, we need a green plan." Wouldn't it be fun if the industry focused and competed on safe technology, on having the safest technology, not the most gigabytes and whatever? So yeah, I think I've covered everything that I had on my notes to talk to. So unless you have another question, I'm good.
All right, sounds good. So to wrap it up, where can people find you? Like, should they go to the website?
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. The website's the best. I have a couple of social media accounts, but I'll be very honest, I don't pay any attention to them. I use them mostly to keep in touch with their grandchildren and their pictures and stuff. So don't try that. It's c4st.org. On the contact, it's info@c4st.org, and that comes to me. So it's if you want to talk to me, just send it to info@c4st.org, and I'll talk to you.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having this great conversation with me.
Well, Emmanuel, thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity, and keep up. You're doing great work. Like you are really educated on this, a lot of this. So keep it up and keep working with your clients and keeping them healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of my story, so it's a huge thing that I've been passionate about researching on.
Great, good for you. God bless you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.